Welcome to the Playlist Podcast, where we talk to artists, designers, engineers, musicians, athletes, and all kinds of people from all walks of life to uncover a little bit about them and the video games that influenced them along the way. Today we're talking to game designer Sam Kayler-Thomson. Now, Sam is a really interesting designer in terms of how he approaches things or how he thinks about level design in particular. And this conversation really touches on how he broke into the games industry and his journey through a variety of roles and how he became briefly for a time an esports athlete as part of that. And then, we closed out with a really, I think, interesting conversation about car culture and where it's at in the wider space. And it was a really fun conversation. So without any further ado, let's jump in.
The game that really made me realize that I could actually get into the games industry side was Team Fortress 2. So Valve, particularly in that era, was like super big on the modding community. Like Team Fortress is a Australian game that got bought out and then had the sequel that ended up running for like close to 20 years now. But I played that game a lot. It was my first PC game, basically. I got a powerful laptop for university, and Team Fortress at that time was part of the Orange Box, so I was playing a lot of that. And I played it for thousands of hours because it was just straight up my only game, and I got bored of it, and then I realized that you could start making maps for it using Hammer. And there was like a big community with a lot of support and a lot of tutorials and a lot of incredibly talented people. And so I ended up spending thousands of hours making Team Fortress maps.
Wow.
Basically.
And you put them up, for the community to access as well?
Yeah, it was basically learning as I was going. This was when I was in university, when I was actually making the maps. And I had already learned about just like actually time boxing everything and actually setting yourself a goal date to ship, because a lot of people fall into that trap of, I could just make it a little bit better if I spend a little bit more time, and then suddenly 3 years later, so I just basically would just like cut off, like working like the gray box at like X date. Okay, now I'm going to learn how to do like best detailing past practices, like learning like lighting positioning in Team Fortress is a really important thing to help guide players towards different parts of the map without necessarily having to sign for it. And just like learning all of those little cool world building tips for that game was definitely like foundational, like learning how to be a designer basically through that. Yeah, I was learning how to do art passes and best practices for like lighting a map and helping like guide players through the level without having to always put up signage for it. Like the Team Fortress art style was very minimalist and prioritized readability during their gameplay. So actually building maps and learning how to do that from the level designer perspective of creating a nice flowing environment that felt good to navigate to get to the actual combat points, and then cutting off at that point going, okay, this is good enough. This is my first map that I've made. This is fine. I've made everything on grid. Every corner's 90 degrees. I don't care. Let's learn how to make this big rectangular box now look like a big wooden shed. And then I'd go through and start doing all of these tutorials from other people where they're like reverse engineered Valve's art style and going, okay, this is what Valve's been doing. This is the best practice on how to detail these buildings. And eventually got a map out. It had a bunch of issues, fell into the major traps that every level designer comes across for a shooting game, where it's just like, oh, you've accidentally made a 100-meter long sight line in a game that has sniper rifles. you didn't realize it because Hammer Editor doesn't have any shading in the 3D view, so you didn't see any depth perception whatsoever. You had all of those things going on, and by the end of it, like going through that and actually doing playtests with the community, I would be joining American servers, so I was learning how to play Team Fortress again with like a third of a second delay. Just the Team Fortress mapping community, they would just run playtests for all these maps. They'd have these plugins that allowed people to do the ping system from Apex like 10 years before it actually was a thing.
Yeah.
All chat would be on so both teams could hear each other. You'd have the people going, oh, I found this little 1 pixel thing that you could stand on like well above the map and see everything and shoot people from it. Okay, cool. And like going through that, like it was basically this crash course in game development without truly realizing it at the time. I was just really, really happy to be making a map and hearing people go, this is not bad. You know? And like, so I've released one map, and then as I was going through university, a class came up where there was this project that was basically creating a piece of content for a game. So it was like kind of like soft introducing some people to modding. Yeah. And just as this was coming up, there was a major YouTuber at the time that was doing a mapping contest, and he sponsored the contest with like first through third place cash prizes. And the US dollar at the time for us was absolutely fantastic. And so I kind of like put 2 and 2 together and thought I could probably hammer out this map in like the 12 weeks that this class takes, get it done in time for the contest, and see what comes of it. And I ended up actually watching this YouTuber's content and seeing what they were into. Because like one thing that you notice is like the YouTube persona, they always have like these little quirks that becomes part of their brand. So like this particular YouTuber would constantly stop and make references to this particular fake brand that's in Team Fortress. And like they had a really, really iconic laugh. And they also were really good with the Soldier and Demo Man characters, which were great for rocket jumping. So I ended up creating this map that was basically designed around creating good YouTube gameplay, even though the actual contest was for a competitive esports 6 versus 6 map. So like I had this map where like you're playing for a control point in the middle of the map, but I put a bridge above it that was really narrow, and a train would drive over the tracks and completely encompass the width of the bridge. So you had no choice but to either jump down or die. So I ended up like putting the little branding that this YouTuber would constantly make references to in the videos right by where the train would come out of nowhere and hit you. And the playing up to that guy worked really well because I got 2nd place. Wow. So I managed to successfully monetize a university assessment. I don't know how common that is, but combined with like the US dollar at that point, I'd actually like done pretty well in the grand scheme of things.
That's awesome.
And that was like my real first foray into actually making it a paid gig. And that was like about a year before I joined EA, basically. Like it was just like this nice little like ramp that felt like there was a big canyon between the ramp and the landing. But yeah, looking back at it now, it kind of like I think helped just a little bit maybe. But yeah.
I think it's interesting as well, because obviously, you know, as you were designing that map, you were being pretty strategic in terms of the Easter egg detail or the usage, not just from a player perspective, but from a multi-angle perspective of like, oh, well, I'm going to make it because I know this guy likes this fake brand and I know, you know, he likes XYZ. So you're building it from multiple perspectives. I played a bit of Team Fortress 2 back in the day, but I also think it'd be very hard to make maps for because those characters all have very unique skill sets. You know, and so if you have a character that goes invisible and can come in here and you have a tank character, like, I mean, I've not played Overwatch or Overwatch 2. And I played like a little bit of Rivals, but I also imagine map design for those games for similar reasons will be incredibly difficult.
When I got a few maps in, you kind of get a general sense of what's fun terrain for the major characters. A lot of the times you end up just basically just running the regular speed characters from where you spawn up to the control point, and you kind of get a sense of the time, like the amount of time that it takes to actually get there. I can't remember the specific length of time I was running with. I think it was like close to like 20 to 25 seconds to get to the middle of the map. And then you end up just trying to craft some interesting geometry along the way. Team Fortress 2 is a really choke point focused game. So you have like big open areas, well, big relatively speaking in Team Fortress. And then they would eventually feed into a number of much narrower doorways to focus the fights and give something for players to, like for a map superiority. So like once you control this particular door, you can make a breakthrough with the medic's overcharge where you're invulnerable for a few seconds, kill the other people, and then you go through the door, and now you're able to start taking over that particular area of the map. And you don't need to worry too much about what's behind you because there's fewer ways for your opponent to get around behind you by that point. What it's worth, it is actually quite interesting seeing the Overwatch team very recently coming across the map design problems when they went from 6 players per side down to 5. For all of the legacy maps that they had, removing 2 players from the fight actually created a lot more space in the area, like much more space, and the maps felt a lot more empty. So you actually could see, if you do a side-by-side screenshot comparison, like they had to actually add in cover after the fact to account for like one fewer player there. It's something that I had to contend with Team Fortress, having to go from like making a map that could fit 12 players aside for regular gameplay, and then coming into this little contest map where we're mostly focusing on 6 players aside. Like that's a pretty significant difference, but at the same time, the community actually arrived at that player count for the map sizes that were actually designed for 12 on 12. They actually wanted to have a bit of space, but you always had these conflicting opinions from the players that just played this game competitive. They would ban all of the weapons that they deemed silly, the ones that had randomness to it, the ones that had stuns to it. And then you'd have the other players that are just like, I want to jump around with explosions and hit you with a whip from above. You have like these 2 things that you're trying to balance at the same time. I definitely skewed towards that side of the equation for this map. Like the competitive integrity of that particular map was thrown out the door as soon as I put a train on it. Because that's just an insta-kill random thing that comes across every now and then, and it sits on the high ground that they're trying to take over. So they were already not too pleased with that to start with, but it created great YouTube content, and I got $150 out of it.
There you go. Everyone wins.
Pretty much, yeah.
So you said, like about a year after that, you ended up at EA, which would have been Fire Monkeys.
Yes.
And did you go straight on to Real Racing 3 at that time?
Not really, no. So basically, I think I joined about a year after Firemount and Iron Monkey got purchased and then merged. So it was still at the building after Richmond for the Firemount folks. And I came on a 6-month contract to do customer support, because at the time, the customer service was actually the community manager managing a email address, and they were not having a great time.
No.
And 6 months prior to me joining, there was one guy that was hired to actually get a help desk website set up for the studio. And once that had happened, I think that's when the team collectively realized that the games had problems, and a lot of people were making support tickets, and that was when I got picked up. Pretty much just answer them. Had a friend from university get a gig there, and he was like, "Oh, you should consider Sam for this role here." And by this point, like, I'd been literally doing a game design course. They knew that I'd been doing a game design course. It was pretty abundantly clear what the actual intent would be in that particular situation. But 6 months turned into a year, and then that year turned into 2 years. And by the end of that, I had transitioned into QA. So I had this really, really unique experience in the studio in that I was dealing directly to the players that were actually dealing with the bugs. And now I have been moved into the team that's reporting and reproducing these bugs to hopefully get those things fixed.
How long did you spend in QA before you started to transition in to a design role? Was it, we took them 2 to 3 years? Because we were there at the same time, but I think we were doing vastly different things. So
Very different points.
yes. Yeah.
For the QA side, I was part of the QA team for about 2.5 years, I think. But I was in this kind of interesting middle ground because while I was doing customer support, that was actually when my love for cars kind of hit a much higher level than they previously were when I was a teenager. And I was playing a lot of Real Racing 3 prior and Real Racing 2 prior to actually joining the studio. So I already had a pretty decent knowledge before coming in and doing the customer support side as well as QA. And because it turned out that I was a top percentile driver in terms of skill in that particular game, the design team would actually get their content in front of me to play test for them right in front of them and get them lap times to make some of the challenges more difficult because they couldn't get those lap times at that point in time. So I was somewhat doing design tasks about 1.5 years into my QA position. And then eventually I made way about 2.5 years or so in onto the design team. It's all a bit of a murky and hazy time for the studio at that point in time. But yeah, I ended up working on the Real Racing project in some capacity for design. About two years in or so was when design work actually started happening, and then I was formally a designer about 6 to 8 months after that.
Yep.
Yeah, a very, very slow transition. There wasn't really in terms of the actual work, there wasn't a full-on light switch had actually been flipped. It was just like a QA task started to take over to design, and then the job role at some point had changed over basically.
But I could also imagine having all that time in QA and then the time before in customer service, then heading into design, would have given you a pretty deep understanding of the kinds of issues or bugs, or as you're designing experiences and tracks, you would have some kind of idea of things to avoid that would really piss players off.
Completely. Basically, a lot of people seem to forget that the people that are contacting you for support are actually your most engaged players, period. They're often the people that are also spending money in your free-to-play game. Mm-hmm. And they are very, very passionate about the experience that they're having. So if they have a bad time, if a challenge is a little bit too difficult, and there were a lot of those challenges for Real Racing 3, where a new car will come out and you have to complete 5 to 7 days worth of challenges, and you get to day 6, you've been playing 20 minutes a day specifically for this car, and you get up to this race and suddenly you're 10 seconds too slow because for whatever reason, the lap time that was provided was just way too fast for them. And they would let you know on the support side. You didn't even need to actually look at the emails that were coming through. You could just read the header and you just got a vibe check immediately of this went too far. That was definitely a learning experience to be empathetic, but also try to reassure them hey, we're looking at fixing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you in a little bit while we actually sort out the problem on the live game. Those types of experiences were really, really useful for the Real Racing team, I feel. It did create a lot of work for the engineering side where we had to create all of these levers on the server side to be able to make a free pass through bugged goal or something like that, where the player could just skip through for free and not have to get that bad time, and then they can continue on and hopefully when the car got very head eyeballed for the last week and a half or so.
Yeah. You mentioned before that, your ability to, drive really well in the game obviously got noticed. And I wanted to bring up a story that we talked about the other day, which was probably my favorite story involving you. Actually, probably one of my favorite stories of actually working on Racing 3. Because I worked on Racing 3 while it was still in development. Like my first game to work on in the games industry was Racing 2. So I had this huge journey of stuff. And at some point, probably a few years into the game became the official partner for Formula E. So we had a lot of Formula E content. But outside of that, it also became it got converted into a sim racer of sorts for Formula E, and would tour around with Formula E as they did their races in different countries. And there was some kind of media done with that. And, we would go and we would shoot content in real time and live stream it in the game, all that kind of stuff. So because of this, there was, I forget the year exactly.
It was 2017. That year's very significantly for me. So
17. So it was the final race in New York. And it was probably a few weeks before the race. And we were kind of brainstorming things we could do. And then someone said, we can make an esports team out of the development team. And I'm thinking, they're going to love that because you've got a job to do, right? But that's kind of what happened. And we built all of this kind of narrative and built the profile and shot all the things, and then went to New York and worked out of YouTube at night, kind of editing. And then during the day, we're in Roadhawk shooting the stuff. What I loved about this is as we built this persona with the team, and the team was great, but you in particular, you really know how to do some shit talking. So you were calling, and you really know the drivers, and you really knew what was going on. So you kept calling out Felix Rosenquist, and calling out his ability and bringing a bit of a WWE flair to it. And I'm like, from my perspective, hailing all the media stuff, I'm like, this is gold. But how is he going to live up to this challenge? Right? So he films a lot of content every day. Like we would shoot, we would edit, we would shoot. It's pretty grueling work, and we're a very small team on that front. But then we get to the final of the esports competition, and you're racing against this guy, with a few other members of the real racing team and a few other Formula E drivers. And I'm in the media booth handling the live stream, and I can see what's going on. And you came first, and you actually beat this guy. And I had this emotional well in my chest, and there with a friend, I'm like, this is incredible storytelling. Because I'm not really a sports person. I understand it at a high level, but I'm not, But this moment, I'm like, oh no, I get it. Like, this is great storytelling. But the fact that you started, like, if you didn't win, like, it would have just been, chatter. But you actually beat the guy, and it's on YouTube, and we'll try and put a link somewhere so people can see it. But that was an incredible moment to kind of go on this micro journey. Like, I kind of felt like it was the compressed greatest moments in esports moment. How did you feel at the time?
That week in New York was one of the most stressful periods of my life. It was the first time I had dealt with US East Coast summer.
Yeah.
So I was not remotely prepared for the humidity. Like, we were talking 35-degree days, that's like 98 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And like super high humidity. And I had packed for a week, not realizing that I'm going to be basically showering 3 times a day as soon as I go outside. And my phone wasn't ready for that either, because on arrival, my iPhone battery expanded inside itself, and my phone died pretty much on arrival in New York. And I couldn't get it repaired at the Apple store in New York because I couldn't remember my Apple password, because they required 2 forms of authentication, and one of them was your Apple ID. But the Apple ID was sitting on my phone. So I couldn't remember my password in the stress and the jet lag, because this trip was the second time I had been overseas to America, I think, and I can't sleep on a plane. So I was basically in transit for 25 hours with no sleep whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Get there, and just immediately start just panicking, basically like, my phone's not working now. And we're spending like the lead up. I'm just like tagging along with work colleagues that did have phones working. So by the time the race had come around, I had actually written down the times that I needed to be where on the track for these meetings. And it was just this tiny little like credit card size piece of paper, like as if I was looking at a bus timetable, and I'd be checking my watch and I'm going, okay, I need to be over at this point in like 20 minutes. I didn't know if that was that time would be pushed forward or back, if people would be there or not. They couldn't get in contact with me. I think Sean Reynolds, he was like running around trying to go, is somebody with Sam?
Yeah.
Is somebody like with him to like do this whole thing? So like this is all going on, and then I'm getting pulled aside by I think it was Lou and Tim who were doing the into camera, and we only have like one shot to do a final Real Racing TV video before the day of the big esports event activation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as well, there was like a storm coming and they were trying to vacate the racetrack because it was a thunderstorm. So like we had the staff that was on track, like trying to set up the big Visa esports activation, trying to strong arm us into getting out of the place, and we're trying to like wrap up filming. So here I am getting handed a microphone with absolutely no preparation whatsoever, getting asked questions while I'm jet lagged, stressed out, humid, sweaty. Like just this entire so I genuinely don't actually remember at least the interviews day prior, and I just autopilot shit talked for probably like 5 or so minutes. I was specifically calling out this one driver in the lead up to the race. I don't think he heard any of it because we ended up talking to him afterwards. I was talking to him in the lead up and I wasn't able to be present for it. And Sean was apparently like prompting him questions to like get into it, but he hadn't been briefed that I had been shit talking him specifically because he plays World of Warcraft. He's a massive gamer, so he kind of would understand the situation that we were in, where it's like he knew what Real Racing was compared to the previous title that they were using for the activation. He knew what to expect. He's also a really, really, really nice, soft-spoken Swedish man.
Yeah.
So like basically just like the duality of this Australian guy talking mad shit and then just this really, really polite Swedish guy. I look like a massive dickhead when you play those two clips back to back.
Yeah. I mean, but going back, like overall, and this was probably not the only time I think in the history of Fire Monkeys that we did this, but we did something that looked massive with very, very little money and resources. I was responsible for getting all the live stream and all the edits done, and we had a period where it didn't work, and so we had one shot and we were there with Google and we were there like with the head of Formula E. It's stressful stuff, and we probably did that a few times. Like I also live streamed for the Daytona 500 into the game. It was just me and with a laptop and Dario Franchitti and all these other people staring on, including it was right near the VIP tent. And we'd been there with Keanu, this is name dropping, but Keanu Reeves. So he's also just like looking at it. I'm like, I feel like an idiot. I feel like so, but we pulled it off, and I think that goes back to, there's this like level of risk taking that we took in that studio, and mostly it paid off. I mean, you can't win it all, but I also think that reflected the scope of the game and all of this stuff. It was an incredible time for experimentation and pushing what was possible on all fronts.
It was like the cherry on top as well with this whole Formula E saga was that I ended up winning the race because we didn't actually know how the Formula E cars drove. New car. And I would be watching the race and I was the person that actually did the car data. So this whole thing was pretty close to rigged as you could potentially get. And basically like I would see that the cars started slowing down really far away and I'm like, it has to be the brakes. They're really heavy cars because they're electric compared to a Formula One car, right? And anyway, the first of the drivers getting to test drive the cars before the race, and they're softly pressing the brake pedal. So although the brake distance was a little bit long compared to real life, because they weren't pressing the brake pedal all the way, they're actually multiplying the distance that it was taking for the car to come to a stop. And they were just complaining about not being able to brake. And I had to politely go slam the pedal down and it'll feel slightly better. But the drivers were contractually obligated to be there. They the Formula E race day is basically a Formula One race weekend condensed down into about 9 hours. So Formula One has 2 hours of practice on a Friday. They have 45 minutes of practice hour and a half of practice on the Saturday, then qualifying for an hour, then the race on Sunday. Formula E is half an hour or so of practice in the morning, another half hour of practice again a couple of hours later, then qualifying a few hours after that, and then the race a few hours after that, all on the one day. So the fact that we had this little window to engage them with the game meant that they weren't super into it, frankly, and they just wanted to get back to the team so they could focus on the real race.
Formula as an operation, when you think about the speed at which they go from country to country, set up those tracks, and the drivers have got such limited time, it is frankly astonishing that there's not more accidents. And it's not that they don't do their due diligence, but it's what they're doing is incredibly ambitious. So the amount of very parts.
Yeah, the amount of moving parts for that road show is absolutely insane. But yeah, as a result though, you have these drivers that couldn't really play the game too well. So I had to gently sandbag the race that I was in. I was out in front and I was looking over to the screen next to me and realized how far ahead I was. So I started to slow down, intentionally overshoot the braking and that stuff to try to get another car back closer to me for the broadcast.
Yeah.
Just to make it watchable. Because I understood the entertainment part of this, because this particular esports race was the only thing going on at the track at that point in time. There was no support races in Formula E at that point. So I'm trying to make it watchable again for the couple of hundred people that were physically there in the activation zone and the thousands of people watching online, right? And this was also another hot day in New York, and we're in a shipping container with no airflow. So we're actually pushing well over 40 degrees inside the container. It was the worst time of my life, basically. I'm getting heat stroke effectively. There's no bottles of water available. And I'm trying to play the game and focus on not screwing up too much while there's a camera just about here in your face, maybe a foot away, trying to go for the reaction shot while you're trying to be serious professional esports racer kind of thing.
It's pretty spectacular. Do you want to segue to your second title that you'd like to talk about?
Boy, I would like to mention Guitar Hero for just introducing me to the concept of actually min-maxing a game. I've initially played games with the story or just vibing out basically for the most part, games like Skate, where you just go around. Oh, that bench looks great to grind on. I'm going to spend 20 minutes here doing cool sort of tricks. But Guitar Hero happened. And that was a pretty significant part of my life. I remember back when it came out in America and reading GameSpot articles and reviews for it. And it's wow, this game's incredible. And it wasn't out in Australia.
Right. Yeah.
It came out in August some year in America, and then it didn't come out in Australia until the following March, because it was the first time that a Western developer had such a giant plastic peripheral to ship with a game. So they were running low on supply immediately at the get-go. But just the novelty of having this guitar controller playing these songs, I didn't listen to much of the music in that game, and that game also shaped a lot of my music tastes. I ended up learning to play guitar because of that game. Real. But going through and just the concepts of just learning when to activate star power to get your high score. I kind of started getting sort of competitive gaming tier stuff, but I wasn't I was good at the game, but I wasn't hit every note perfectly without making any mistakes, pushing for the upper percentile of scoring. I was very much like very, very engaged in the title without going into the taking over my entire life. This kind of like was balancing with Team Fortress at this point in time. So it's kind of like two different parts of the industry where it's like playing rhythm games is like one entire little subgenre, and then you're playing this massively popular shooting game on the other side. Yeah, just being able to like delve into that side of the community as well was just like this really intriguing experience. And just watching that game get sequels out the bars basically, and then just like, what if you ended up having a full band?
Yeah.
And falling down that rabbit hole and spending way too much money on drum kits because you broke them all the time because you were playing them.
And then it's like, yeah, because didn't like DJ Hero also came out a few years after that, which looked fun, but I kind of feel like it came and it didn't have the same traction, and then it had a cool peripheral and it went like pretty quickly.
DJ Hero was a fantastic game released at a really bad time for like at this point in time. I think we're up to like Guitar Hero 5. The peak was Guitar Hero 3. And if you're playing rhythm games at that point in time, you were probably playing Rock Band if you're in certain regions where it was more freely available in Australia. But DJ Hero came out and it was a completely different genre of music. They had some absolutely insane musical mashups. It's like the entire concept of that game was that you had a crossfader between two songs to hit the timings with, and you'd have the scratch pad with 3 buttons to play Guitar Hero, but with like the scratch pad action instead of strumming. But you ended up having like these absolutely insane crossovers to try to get the Guitar Hero market to play DJ Hero. So you end up having like Motorhead, the iconic like 60s, 70s originators of heavy metal. And the song would be blended in with this EDM, like drum and bass kind of like electronic music. And you're crossfading between Lemmy from Motorhead with his like gravelly voice smashing straight into like a DJ scratch, and then suddenly it was like a massive synth moment. And I could see why it didn't take off in that specific moment.
Yeah. It was like I was just going to say, probably at that time, I think mashups, there was Bill Talk, the producer, who did a lot of crazy mashups and Soul Wax and Peeper and Fruity Loops kind of mashing together MP3s. So it felt like it was the flavor of the moment.
Yeah.
But I think
basically learned about an entire German subgenre where there was like a group of clubs, I think it was Berlin, where there was just all of these DJs uploading MP3s illegally because they get taken down from YouTube, where it's like they're actually taking songs from Guitar Hero and Rock Band, because to make those songs work for the full band, they had to get the original master recordings of the song, where the drums, the keyboards, the vocals, they were all separated out. And people would rip those from the game discs. And then these DJs would actually go and take these song files, and then they'll create their own mashups. So it was like Lady Gaga and Bullet for My Valentine.
Yes.
Where it's like Lady Gaga singing over the top of like this melodic metal song. And it didn't sound fully awful, which was kind of impressive. But I think that kind of like summarized like that little era where it was like DJ Hero 1 and 2. Like DJ Hero 2 was a fantastic game, but nobody played it because music games at that point were pretty dead, frankly. Like that was a wonderful little time for creativity, at least.
I want to talk cars. I know that you are the owner of a very nice car, but you're also interested in cars in a way that you have pretty broad knowledge between motorsport and manufacturers, but I think also wider car culture. And, I think it's a very interesting perspective. Like you were kind of talking like way back, designing maps, and you're kind of designing it for player, but designing it with content. I think you think about cars in the same way. And we were talking the other day about 7-Eleven and how car culture has helped drive or build a brand identity for 7-Eleven in America. I don't know, do you want to talk about cars and 7-Eleven? And
yeah, like it isn't even just 7-Eleven actually, but like 7-Eleven was definitely one of the notable brands that has popped up lately. Where basically it seems like at least our generation, for the most part, that grew up playing Gran Turismo and like idolizing those Japanese cars for the most part, have now like kind of gotten to that point where they're able to afford something that they were playing back in the day, like importing it into America for cheap or whatever have you. And everybody just gets really, really enthusiastic about the cars that they're building. And then they go out to go for coffee, they go for late night runs out to the local takeout place or whatever have you. And for some people, it was a 7-Eleven, and just watching like this completely like out of the blue trend pop up where somebody just took a photo of their car outside. Well, not even sure it was their car, but it was a nice looking car and it was parked up at 7-Eleven. And 7-Eleven has that iconic color stripe on the shop that's lit up at night, and you get a really, really nice reflection on the bodywork. And people go, wow, that's actually a really nice like way to frame your car, share it for content and all that stuff. And watching that blow up and then seeing 7-Eleven themselves actually like really like trickle down on this kind of thing. It's been somewhat strange in a way to see a brand take up this connection with the car community, but have it accepted in a somewhat like almost natural way. Like it feels like natural for it, like whether they're a lot more prominent in America, like compared to down here, but like seeing people actually like intentionally as a result, like going to 7-Eleven, parking up and having events there, and having the engagement with like major content creators, that's been really interesting. And now Pennzoil, which is a big oil brand in America, like they've started to also hook into that same thing, and they're actually creating like YouTube content where it's just really, really nice, dramatic, artsy shots of really, really interesting cars going out for a cruise. And they're actually engaging with the content creators that are already in the community instead of like finding an advertising house and going for that. Like it's being a really, really authentic like engagement with the car community. And it's been really, really fun to watch that. Has really like,
Yeah.
go ahead.
It's an interesting evolution because I think there's probably a lot of people that will be engaging with that content. They wouldn't necessarily, own a Japanese tuner car or own like a 911 but they like the flavor and the feel of it because it's art, it's aesthetic, it's a vibe, right? And then I think you mentioned it's a generational thing, and it is kind of this convergence of video games. It could be the Need for Speed franchise or other franchises, and then anime, whether it be like, Initial D or probably wider flavors. And then there was that whole kind of vaporwave, synthwave thing. And then now you have social media and you have, at a period where people could buy cheap mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, and now people have their phones, and you start looking at streetwear labels like, Peaches in Korea, or if you think of, Japanese labels, and then you see brands like 7-Eleven going, we can get on that as well, because it's a vibe that transcends the core of what the thing is about. It's like, it's a bigger thing than that. And music as well, so it's a really interesting evolution to see. And then also, I think with creators, using Unreal Engine and just creating beautiful art and graphics and videos, and then putting that on social and building awareness that way, because then you can be a photographer without needing to photograph the actual cars themselves.
That's where Forza Horizon, Forza Horizon for me was a major part of like learning how to frame cars. Like the photo mode in Forza Horizon, I think is about 50% of my playtime. Just like I would end up just driving around with a car in that game. I don't modify any of the performance or whatever. I just go for a cruise and then I park up at an interesting landmark and just play with focal length, playing with the angles of the car. Like if you go really far back, because you couldn't, just trying to like make really, really natural looking photos and sharing them with the community. That was always a fun one. Like one of the sneaky ones that I did was I tried to simulate the iPhone wide angle lens of just somebody just like walking down the footpath sidewalk and just coming up to just a regular MX5 Miata and just like tried to simulate just holding up the phone just up to their face and just like pressing the shutter button and just like intentionally framing it quite poorly, but like from about like 6 feet off the ground, like as if it was somebody's head height. And then I just I overexposed the shot with the camera mode and saved the screenshot and shared it to the Miata subreddit. And they took it as a real car find because I had managed to like nail down like this perfect perspective, even though it was what's the Horizon 4. It was just like a really, really surprising thing to just like be able to do that kind of stuff. And you do see people making the transition from doing the digital car photography into the real world or doing actual like car bodywork designs, like the Kaiser on Instagram. Like he made his name for just grabbing cars from Turbo Squid, dropping them down onto the ground, basically putting on a really flashy set of rims. And then you just watch that organically go into making these really, really eccentric wide bodies. And then years after that, he gets contacted by some people going, hey, we'd like to make this a real thing. And now he's designing a Jaguar Resta mod with Tom Walkinshaw Racing.
Yeah.
Like, that's just insane to watch unfold over the last few years.
And I think that's, that kind of probably leads to my final question, which is, now with AI being absolutely everywhere, you do kind of start to see an evolution where people are taking existing kits and then modifying it in ways that you probably never could. And part of that, there's an argument that it's pretty inauthentic because it's AI. But do you think that that kind of cultural soup and tools like AI will help push real automotive forward, people taking those designs and translating them into kits? And secondly, like a lot of the kind of really futuristic EV designs that manufacturers are coming out with are starting to push the envelope in terms of style and aesthetic in very extreme ways. So how do you think AI will change car culture from an art and, culture perspective? And then where do you think cars are going in terms of form and function because of it? It's a long question.
Yeah. I think in terms of the AI thing, there's kind of like a thing that I've noticed at least where AI is just starting to create bait content for content on Instagram and that. I had a video pop up that was AI generated that was just baiting people into like washing your car, and they had just generated this video of a Nissan Silvia being craned into a swimming pool. And it's just like, you could just wash your car like this. I think with that kind of stuff, I don't know how far you can really push the creative side long term, because AI inherently is just taking things that exist and then amalgamating them into like their own thing-ish. But you could take a look at it and go, this was taken verbatim from this particular element of a car. There's always that small element of like, this was actually like mixed together, as opposed to somebody has done an interpretation of that design and then blended it in a bit more organically. I think what would end up happening is that probably about 10 to 15 years ago, there was actually a very small niche car community where they would Photoshop car body kits and actually do like Pimp My Ride, but to just photos. So like I learned how to make carbon fiber hoods for a car in Photoshop because of these communities, like going through the entire process of generating like the gradient fills and all that stuff to look like the carbon weave, masking off the bonnet in an accurate way, figuring out the right blend way to actually make it look like it was really in the frame. I could see AI kind of filling a little bit of that niche and giving it a platform to people to actually then transition into making 3D content themselves and creating things from their own mind from scratch. I don't know how far you can go just by like generating and considering it close to final. It's a very intriguing time. It's basically comes down to what the person's goal is, because in the car community, I've noticed at Cars and Coffee, you end up getting into like two different types of people that turn up. It's the people who are into cars and are there to actually catch up with people who are in a very similar car to them. The other side of it is you're too young to afford a car and you have got your iPhone on a gimbal and you're filming for TikTok. That appears to be the two types of people that turn up to Cars and Coffee, at least down here around the Melbourne area. Whether or not those people that are creating the content are looking for, or if they're actually using it as a creative outlet, I think will determine what the AI component actually ends up getting useful. Whether or not it's like, I could just type in this paragraph and generate a 5-second video that I can upload and get X views to promote my brand. Or I could type in this paragraph and create something as a starting point for me to then design a really, really cool car or design a cool body kit and fall into that kind of little silo. I think there's like a very much a fork in the road when it comes to AI usage. And I don't know how much blending there is between the two things.
Thanks so much for listening. You've been listening to Playlist, and this is a podcast produced by the 3000s with intro music by Sam Shepard and also produced by myself, Benjamin Dorr. If you would like updates on the show, you can follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with links in the show notes below. And if you would like more content, please remember to give us a follow or a subscribe on your chosen platform. We'll see you next time.